West Indians of my generation and older would probably share memories of both the excitement and bewilderment of the 1950s. I was born in 1950 and was actually 5 going on 6 when Sparrow first won his double crown and PNM its first emphatic election victory. The mood of expectancy at the prospect of a federated West Indies, Sparrow captures in that calypso, all away as one. It's interesting that even at this early stage, Sparrow's notion of federation extends beyond island states to the West Indian diaspora. This is certainly not the vision of the British, who, having for centuries sucked our economies dry, were simply anxious to release themselves from further responsibility for regional development. Tough times in the 1940s had seen thousands of West Indians migrating to Britain to be part of the post-war reconstruction there. These conditions were forestalled in Trinidad of the early 1950s by the wartime Yankee presence a decade earlier and a post-war boom in economic activity that sustained the buoyancy and optimism of the period and the livelihood of characters like Jean and Dinah.
Jean and Dinah, Rosita run round the corner posing. Bet your life is something this. Are you singing? And when you catch them broken, you can get it all for nothing. Don't make a row.
Sparrow's assertiveness reflected the mood of a moment that was being shaped in the country by a single phenomenal character, Eric Eustace Williams. Both were new factors in the colonial equation, in the sense that the intervention of each charted the future in their respective fields, politics and calypso. Nothing would be the same once they had stepped onto the stage. It is no coincidence that C.L.R. James, perceptive as ever, selects these two personalities in his study of two West Indian personalities written after his disenchantment with Williams's politics. In his critical analysis of Eric Williams, James attributes his political ascent to public response. I quote from James, "What created him and sent him along a dangerous road was the response of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They turned out in their thousands, and on Bandung, Chagaramas, morality in public affairs, a new society, a strong federation, the people kept on saying, 'Doctor, that is fine. Tell us more.' Williams kept on telling them, and they were always eager for more." The impact of Eric Williams's nationalist campaign is well summarized by Barbadian-born writer George Lamming. Now, Lamming is interesting because he had spent some time in Trinidad in 1946, and then he returned in 1954, so he was able to see the activities in Trinidad before Williams came and then while Williams was there. And he says, he describes Woodford Square in this account. Woodford Square is, of course, the location where a lot of the political activity. Williams made Woodford Square the University of Woodford Square. It was the venue for popular education. And Williams, Lamming describes it that way. In 1946, he says, Woodford Square was what he calls a market for night food. All transactions were done in the shadows. Women strolled about in search of male friends, whom they had not yet known. Men sat on the benches in an attitude of tolerable and even pleasing boredom. Today, which is 1954, this same Woodford Square has become Mr. Everyman's Academy. The same people who used it appropriately or inappropriately, as you like, in the past, now assemble there to learn. Dr. Williams started in a way, this is Lamming continuing, which to my mind is unique in the history of Caribbean politics. He started with an intensive, quite exhaustive campaign of popular education. He turned history, the history of the Caribbean, into gossip. Everything became news: slavery, colonization, and so on. His lectures always retained the character of whisper, which everyone was allowed to hear, a rumor which experience had established as truth. And whatever misgivings we may have about the ultimate value of popular education, this undertaking, it seems to me, has become an achievement of genius on the part of a teacher. End of Laming's quote. Out of the square, the streets and the life of Port of Spain nightclubs enter Sparrow. With bravado, self-confidence, and sheer creativity, he jostles his way boldly beyond boundaries of bedroom, politics, and the very limits of his art, refusing to be constrained by society's definition of a Calypsonian. He was out to make and leave his mark.
Well, it's the glamour boys again. We are going to rule Port of Spain. No more Yankees to spoil we fete. Dorothy have to take what she get. All of them who used to make style, taking 2 shillings with a smile. Well, it's competition for so. Trouble in the tongue as the price gone low. What the talk is?
Dinah.
A little louder. Bet your life is something they're selling. And when you catch them broken, you can get it all for nothing. Don't make a row.
Sparrow was a new phenomenon in several distinctive ways. In the first place, the nationalist movement, representative of the largely urban black masses, never before represented in government, were the same people for whom the Calypsonian Vox Populi spoke. It was easy, as Sparrow himself says, to fall in love with the PNM, of which he became a member. Such a relationship between Calypsonian and political authority would not have been conceivable under the colonial government. He could champion the party's cause in his praise song.
Praise little Eric. We are proud and glad. We have a better future here in Trinidad. PNM, yet they have nobody like them. For we have a champion leader, William the Conqueror.
But there were other singers, as one would expect, who were unqualified in their praise of the new party. Most notably, Stryker was the Calypso King of 1958 and 1959, and the Mighty Cypher. But Sparrow broke away from the pack in terms of his particular combination of gifts that included wit, challenge of his lyrics, his musicality, his singing ability, and his energetic performance style. Calypsonians traditionally stood and delivered their songs. Sparrow whined and danced and performed all over the stage. His waist was completely Caribbean. His dexterity as a composer and his defense of the regime are evident in the simple call and response, "Can't get away
from the tax."
from the tax.
I would like to know why they blaming the doctor so. I would like to know why they blaming the doctor so. One set of people cussing, while the next set of people fussing, running them out like they eat broclax, blaming the doctor for income tax. But, friends, I want all them to know you can't get away from the tax. Oh, you could jump up high or low.
You can't get away from the tax.
You could go to New York or Tokyo.
You can't get away from the tax.
Ask Michelle or Erica. You
Can't get away from the tax.
Oh, it's worse in America. You can't get away from the tax. Oh, so doctor or no doctor, you can't get away from the tax.
Though in love with the PNM, Sparrow as an artist never becomes Bazodi. You all will have to explain that. He remains his own man, never losing touch with his liaisons on the street. This allowed a certain critical distance within his political marriage. 5 months after PNM's landslide victory, as the burden of self-government had to be borne by the people, their honeymoon almost ends in domestic violence. No doctor, no. Listen carefully.
Okay. Listen carefully. I am a man that's never be sorry. I say listen carefully. I am a man that's never be sorry, but I went and I vote for some councilmen. They have me now in the pen after promising so much tender care. They forget me as they walk out of Woodford Square. So they raise up on the taxi fare. No, doctor, no. And why the blasted milk so dear? No, doctor, no. I want them to remember. We support them in September. They better come good because I have a big piece of mango.
Right. So Sparrow would tell it like it is and stamp his authority with if Sparrow says so, is so. Fourth, Sparrow, unlike many of his contemporaries and predecessors, saw himself as a professional. He set out to earn his living doing what he was best at doing. He repeatedly makes this case in his songs. When he loses the crown to Mighty Douglas in 1961, unfairly in his view, his reprise was swift and merciless.
They want a new king. They will do anything. They want a new king. They will do anything. Well, they don't like the way I stand up for money. And if I don't get paid, I ain't singing for nobody. So they decided to clip my wing and put an obstacle there as a new king. They pick a man with no originality, no personality. They're trying to make me look small. All he have is a deep croon, but he won't change his tune at all. And it's this song, that song, same melody, no variety. If you don't believe me, you could ask anybody if it ain't. Black man, I hear you.
But it wasn't only the CDC judges he would take on in his battle, not just for his own gains, but respect for the art and profession of the Calypsonian. With superb timing, he led Calypsonians to boycott the Junior Chamber of Commerce-run Calypso competition in 1957, 1 year after receiving the $40 first prize as the 1956 Calypso King. All of $40, yes. This competition had long been a source of grievance among Calypsonians. It was run, of course, by the white business elite in Trinidad. They were the creative, the Calypsonians, that is, were the creative and indigenous talent on the show. But the white beauty queens, vestiges of a plantation past, were put on parade and received prizes like trips abroad, motor cars, household appliances. It took the authority of Sparrow as the reigning king to turn his back on this colonial charade.
I gon' play me mass as usual because I love me carnival. I gon' play me mass as usual because I love me carnival. But no competition for me in San Fernando or the city. They could preach Peter, they could preach Paul. I wouldn't even go to Savannah to see football, cause I intend to keep my costumes on the shelf. Let they keep the prize in Savannah for their own self. Let the queen run the show without steel band and calypso. Who want to go could go up there, but me ain't going nowhere.
If Sparrow brought these ideas by his presence on the public stage, Williams's political career is launched against a background of his redoubtable advocacy of regionalism. From his work with the Caribbean Commission, Williams locates his authority in his scholarship and knowledge of the region. It is a region shaped by sugar plantations in which French, Spanish, Dutch, and British colonies alike shared a common history. His view is therefore pan-Caribbean. Following his 1940 tour as an academic researcher to Haiti, Santo Domingo, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and other islands, Eric Williams writes, "This most valuable summer expedition had widened my Caribbean vistas, expanded my knowledge, and laid the foundations for my emergence as intellectual spokesman of the Caribbean peoples. I was in 1940 a West Indian who had more direct and closer contact historically and actually with the Caribbean area as a whole than any other. The subsequent years were to emphasize the flowering of a truly Caribbean vision which in 1932 in Trinidad had been limited to Trinidad and Tobago, and in 1939 had expanded at Oxford to embrace the British West Indies. He saw not islands, nor colonies divided by sea, languages, and European metropoles, but a region united by a common history and aspirations. Speaking, researching, and delivering lectures in French and Spanish, he was well able to substantiate his claim of being spokesman of the Caribbean peoples. This specialization in Caribbean affairs developed while teaching at Howard University and would later shape his politics. He says, West Indians had traditionally deserted the West Indies, Padmore for Africa, James for the absurdities of world revolution, the majority of West Indians for the traditional medicine and law. I would cultivate the West Indian garden, from Cuba to French Guiana. And I had already made up my mind that when the West Indian University came, as come it must, I would be prepared to play my part and leave Washington. His political career, as Laming noted, would begin with a lecture series organized by the Teachers Economic and Cultural Association in Trinidad in 1954. Williams reflects, the lectures, no matter how they varied, were designed as elaboration of certain basic principles which I sought to inculcate. The first was nationalism, the defense of national interests against colonialism. The second principle was the imperative of federation. Federate, federate, federate. That was my battle cry. And above all, I stressed the importance of education. The lectures have been university dishes served with political sauce. One senses a connection, for instance, between Sparrow's brilliant first-person narrative interpretation of what may have been a Williams lecture on slavery.
I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and brought here from Africa. I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and brought here from Africa. It was licks like fire from the white slave master every day. I dug on my knees for weeks and months. It was licks like peas before I reached in the West Indies. They make me work, yes I work, yes I work so hard each day. And I toil, and I toil, and I toil, and I toil so hard, no pay. I'm dying. I'm crying. Oh, Lord, I want to be free.
The foregoing addressed the question of what these individuals represented or may have stood for on the stage of an emergent nationalism. We now want to look at the performances they executed in these roles or representations. One as Mr. Caribbean, the other as the self-proclaimed Calypso King of the world. And the plot their careers followed. Eric Williams and Sparrow are both warrior kings in their respective domains. Gordon Lewis, that seminal intellect at the University of Puerto Rico, places Eric Williams' battles on three fronts: the West Indian federal government after 1958, the colonial office, and the Americans. To this, we've added local opponents, comprising principally the established elite class and the official opposition. The struggle with the federal government, for which he himself had fought, was based on opposing views on the powers and scope of such a government, which was sticking points from the very start of negotiations between Trinidad and Jamaica. In the first instance, and Eric Williams and Sir Grantley Adams, the federal premier later on. By the decisive 1960 Lancaster House Conference, The whole federal proposition, which Eric Williams had continually championed, had been watered down to what he would term a bastard federation, weak and anemic. Even James, while roundly criticizing Williams's political backsliding in his view, defends him against the other federal leaders. James says, in his fight for Chagaramas, for a strong West Indian independence and his devotion to the idea of a strong federation, Williams not only did not have their help, they hated him for what he was doing. Some of our psychological analysts wonder now whether Williams meant what he said in those days. I have incontrovertible evidence that for a great part of the time, he meant what he said. During that time, he did and said some splendid things. I admired him immensely. C.L.R. James. One of Williams's most telling statements, of course, was the one that followed Jamaica's decision to withdraw from the Federation. Despite British entreaties that Trinidad and Tobago should pick up the role and responsibilities Jamaica had been expected to bear, Williams responds, nothing doing. A federation with Jamaica or no federation. I dealt with the matter publicly after the referendum. 1 from 10 leaves naught. It was good mathematics and better politics. While the population, having built up great expectations, felt deflated and somewhat bewildered by the decision, it took Sparrow, in his role as popular artist, to explain, biased though his explanation was in placing all the blame on Jamaica, the situation to the public.
People want to know why Jamaica ran from the Federation. You're singing? People want to know why Jamaica ran from the Federation. But Jamaica have a right to speak she mind. That is my opinion. And if you believe in democracy, you will agree with me. Cause if they know they didn't want federation, and they know they didn't want to unite as one, I say to tell the doctor you're not in favor, and don't behave like a blasted traitor. This is no time to say you are federating no more.
The crux of the split between Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the countries over federation, William states, was on his stand in the Chagaramas matter. Hundreds of acres of Trinidad's verdant northwest peninsula had been leased by Britain, to the US in 1941 for 99 years in order to establish wartime military bases. In return, Britain received 50 overaged battleships to help in the war against Germany. Sparrow outlines the issue for us.
Long, long ago, we didn't even know, not even a tip. Nobody said Chagaramas was exchanged for a few old battleships. So when we ask the Yankees to move, nobody really cares. They refuse to go, they say the base is theirs for another 99 years. So when we ask the chief minister, he say no, it ain't even register, it a seal or stamp. Somebody is a scamp. If they go remain, let them take the Caroni swamp.
Eric Williams was rightly outraged. He dug in his heels and blasted both Britain and the US authorities on the deal and their resistance to reviewing it. Having seen to it that Chagaramas was chosen as the site for the federal capital and that there was inadequate documentation of the UK-US deal, Williams rallied the population to march in demonstration against the US in one of the most defining moments of the era. His declaration on the day locates the struggle not only in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, but the region as a whole. He says, from today, April 22nd, 1960, 11 a.m., we are a different people. We are not what we were on April 21st. We are here today as West Indians, a new nation born out of the amalgam of disparate cultures and different racial stocks. Let us march united, resolved to recognize the equality of all West Indians, moral, religious, political, and legal, resolved to expunge from the West Indian vocabulary the nomenclature of colonialism, niggers, Cole's Chink, and Limeys.
1960 remains in my memory. 1960 remains in my memory. Right there in Trinidad, things happen good, both and bad. One thing will stick with me throughout the eternity. It's a day of all days to remember, when we march in the rain with our premier. One voice, one prayer, one cry, one call. Freedom, independence for one and all.
That calypso is not a Sparrow calypso, it's by another calypsonian, the mighty Duke. But it makes the point. And what we're talking about is the way in which the calypsonian at all points in our history memorializes these events. For his part, Sparrow, keeper of Jean and Dinah, was alert to the economic dominance of the US, even though they had lost the battle to retain their base at Chagaramas. Both he and Eric Williams were repeatedly attacked on ostensibly different grounds by the organ of the white elite, the Guardian newspaper. Sparrow was regularly accused of singing indecent or smutty songs, even by some fellow calypsonians. Of course, that's not true. The case against Eric Williams was the threat the planter class felt to their historical privileges of wealth, education, and political power. While Williams attacked Massa, the bastions of capitalism and slavery, in his lectures at the University of Woodford Square, Sparrow countered in Kaiso.
Every day I read the Guardian. Well, there's plenty criticism. Every day I read the Guardian. Well, there's plenty criticism. What I do for them, I ain't know. Why they love me so? They think they're hurting me, but they're stupid. The more they talk, is the better for me. It goes to show that they think of me more and more. I get more publicity than I ever could pay for. They call and criticize. They fill the papers with plenty lies. Brother, I have no objection, cause I know to myself I'm the greatest calypsonian.
As for the official opposition, the Hindu-based DLP, he threatens in language containing all the violence of the street fighter turned party fanatic. Sparrow uses the license of the calypso to unleash an attack uncensored on the opposition. He defends the exercise of power unimpeded by a parliamentary process on the grounds of the opposition's incompetence.
All of them, they gave in their verdict about the doctor getting me sick. All of them giving the verdict about the doctor getting me sick. I don't know why they wouldn't. They mind this stinking business and leave the man in peace. Leave the damn doctor. Yes, they getting me mad. Leave the damn doctor. It's like murder in Trinidad. Sing, leave the damn doctor. He ain't trouble you. Leave the damn doctor, because what he do, he do.
The danger in this stance towards a fledgling democracy, Sparrow will recognize a few years later. Like Sparrow, Williams is at his best in battle, whether against racism at Oxford, the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission, colonial governments, and their interests, or the US interests in the Caribbean. His weapon was education, mass education. My strategy, he says, was very simple. If war is a continuation of politics by other means, politics for me was a continuation of education by other means. The Caribbean, he continues, the Caribbean Commission's letter of May 26, 1954, he says, was a declaration of war. I accepted the challenge immediately. In a private letter to Norman Manley, he discusses his strategy. He says, in my fight against the Commission, I decided to make use of 3 weapons. The first was to complete the autobiography I had begun the year before in Zurich. I immediately took a month's leave, went to Mayaro, and began to write. This was planned as the first step in a literary campaign, which would be followed by an anthology of Caribbean literature and my history of the Caribbean. As I told Manley, I am persecuted because of my writings, I think, therefore, I ought to write some more. In his battles, his usual intellectually sharp and clinically detached language becomes really invigorated. I put the story in a language that was readily understood in Woodford Square of Trinidad in 1955. The commission had tried to get me out of Washington. Then they tried to keep me away from Trinidad. Now that I am back in Trinidad, they tried to get me back into Washington. What was I? A blasted football to the commission? Who the hell were the bloody commission anyway? I let them have it. I told the Woodford Square audience I was born here and it's here I stay. I am going to let my bucket down where I am, right here with you in the British West Indies. Witness Gordon Lewis comments on Williams's performance. He says, to watch the political leader, the doctor, undertake that task in his mass lectures at the University of Woodford Square is to appreciate how first he managed to invest the dullest facts and figures with a life of their own. Italicized by the measured